critics, my words are like physics, a force that they can't stop. They just don't get it, I think they forget I'm not done till I'm on top. I know I was born for this. I know I was born for this. I believe we can write our story.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Half a day, good morning, hello, wherever you're at, what time you're watching this. It could be any time of the day, so just hello. It's Gary here, Wise Leadership Solutions, words from the wise. And today I have got a special guest from, way back for me in the Wayback Machine. I saw this gentleman go through Chief Petty Officer initiation. It had to be 2008, 2009 timeframe. So we're going to jump into that. His name is Mr. James Thompson. He's a retired United States Navy Lieutenant LDO type. And so, James, what's up, brother? How you doing, man?
Doing well. It's good to reconnect. Like you said, it's quite a ways in the Wayback Machine. Yeah. And you're right. It was 2009 was the year I went through Chief Petty Officer initiation.
Awesome. You know, this is like my favorite part of this whole experience is like catching back up with old teammates and like just seeing how they're doing, hear what's going on, and then sharing the stories with the world, because I believe that the more we can share with other people, the more maybe they can connect and they can hear ways to find success, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit. I think connections is a big part of how you progress through your career, and how you can almost measure your success is the quality of the connections that you develop. And, you know, that often helps propel you to even greater success than you could ever achieve on your own, is that network of people, whether it's mentors, colleagues, friends, and even subordinates. Like, everybody kind of adds to that in a constructive way if you're doing things right.
Facts, man. Definitely well said. All right, so let's jump right into it. Now, I remember something about you going to MIT or something like that back before you joined the Navy. So I just don't. Are you from Massachusetts originally?
No, I grew up in a Navy family. I'm actually fourth generation Navy. Going back to my great grandfather on my mother's side, he was a Navy diver in the early days of Navy diving. My grandfather on my mother's side was a corpsman and served with the Marines at Guadalcanal in World War II. Both my parents were in the Navy. My father was a jet pilot for the Navy and got out as a lieutenant commander. My mom was a Navy nurse, and she got out as a lieutenant when she got pregnant with me. So a lot of Navy tradition in my family. I didn't feel pressured to go into the Navy, but it just felt right. So we moved back to Tennessee, which is where my father grew up, when I was about 8 years old, and that's when he got out of the Navy with a medical discharge, unfortunately.
Okay.
So I grew up in Tennessee, and then as I was progressing through my high school career, was looking at different schools that I could maybe go to and avenues that I could help pay for it, because we didn't have a whole lot of money of our own to pay for it ourselves. So I was looking at different scholarship opportunities, and I stumbled across the Navy ROTC scholarship and applied to that program in my junior year of high school, and got picked up and was basically given an opportunity to go to any Naval ROTC school within the system that I could get into. So I shot for the moon, applied to MIT and got in.
Yeah.
I completed 3.5 years of my education at MIT. Unfortunately, during my senior year, my family was going through some challenges, some health issues with my father, some employment issues, and just a lot of things going on back home. So I chose to withdraw from school to go back home to try to help out with the family. Unfortunately, wasn't able to return to complete my MIT education in a timely fashion. And after I'd been withdrawn for a year, I got the letter from the Department of the Navy that either I could pay back something on the order of like $86,000 and change of scholarship funds, or I could go see my nearest recruiter and enlist for not less than 4 years to serve some time in the Navy to do something.
Shut up! I never knew that part. I never knew that. Well, I mean,
so I was on a path towards a commission. I'd already selected for the NFO program.
Yeah.
and kind of was on that path, and then kind of got derailed a little bit. Enlisted in the Navy, went to boot camp, went through machinist mate A school, and my first ship was an old Austin class LPD, so a steam plant where machinist mates really earn their bread and butter. Was definitely a challenging tour. The ship was like 38 years old already by the time I got there. We were in the middle of a 5-year boiler inspection, and seeing the ship broken down soup to nuts and putting it back together gave me a great opportunity to learn my rate quickly.
Yeah. So hold on, James. Before we jump to there, so you do 3 years in college, an ROTC scholarship, and your family back home needs you to come back home to Tennessee, and you talk to the leadership of the school, and they're like, "Yep, we understand, got it." So you go back home, and like you said, you couldn't go back to school, and so the Navy sends you a letter, and it says basically either you pay us back $80,000. So just so everyone's listening, a 4-year enlistment can be equal to $80,000 in education at MIT. It sounds like that's give or take, because you got to keep the credits, right? I mean,
right.
You got to keep the education. On the reverse side, I mean, so I'm sure you're home for that year. You're trying to figure out things with your family. Are you thinking about what you're going to do with life after not going back to the Navy at that point? And was joining the
I was really hopeful that I was going to be able to get things settled at home enough that I could return to MIT fast enough to not incur that enlistment obligation. I knew that was on the horizon. I was on very good terms with the MIT faculty and how I handled the withdrawal with my academic advisor. The commanding officer of the ROTC unit didn't exactly see eye to eye with my situation. So, that kind of influenced, I think, the speed with which the Navy was trying to act on either, hey, pay us back the money or go do an enlistment. So I didn't have a lot of flexibility there, but
when you went
I was prepared to go into the Navy. Like I'd already had that mindset for 3 years at MIT. Like I was going to go into the Navy. It just was a different path. Okay,
and once you got that notification from the Navy, like, hey, you either got to pay or you got to go sign up and ship out. Family, it sounds like they were able to support, and so you were able to move forward and handle that. And when you went to the recruiting station, did you get offered other rates, like other ratings to pick from, or how did you get stuck? I mean, nothing gets stuck. I'm a snipe too, right? But
so that's a little bit of a, there was some bumps in the road, I'll say. So when I responded, they actually sent me to a special processing MEP center in New Orleans. And through that, I initially contracted to be a nuclear machinist mate with a sign-on bonus. While I was in boot camp, and for those of you who have been through boot camp, if you remember, probably about 5 weeks into boot camp, there's a day called classification day. So anybody that's not already assigned a rate gets to go talk to the classifiers and find out if they can maybe sign up for a rate or if they want to stay undesignated. So the day after classification date, we got notification that there was a problem with my security clearance for the nuclear machinist mate program.
Okay.
Effectively, the problem with that is I made kind of a fateful young and dumb mistake that some people have made, and I've since certainly recovered from it. But I had a DWI charge when I was at home in Tennessee, trying to help my family and everything. Alcohol was part of my process, unfortunately, at that time. So a DWI in Tennessee is a slightly lesser offense than a DUI. But nonetheless, it was an alcohol offense. It was something that I disclosed during my enlistment to make sure that, they knew about it and everything. I didn't try to hide it or anything, but they decided that was too much of a blemish on my record and that they weren't going to give me a security clearance to go through nuclear machinist mate training. So because I was already a day past classification date, I also didn't get as many options offered to me, because if it had been one day prior, then I would have had a whole plethora of stuff. So they gave me the option of being a conventional machinist mate, I think it was still at the time called an SH, but basically like the barbers and the ship storekeepers,
Yep.
or an SK at the time, which was just, the supply guys.
Like,
Or I could go undesignated. So I was like, all right, I was supposed to be a nuclear machinist mate. A conventional machinist mate is still dealing with, mechanics and machinery and equipment, and so I'll go with that, because that still seemed like a pretty good fit, because I was coming from an engineering background.
God bless our Navy sometimes, man. We just can't.
So
like you said, if it was one day before classifications, you would have got more opportunities. And it's like, who's holistically looking at this person and thinking to themselves, like, all right, here's this young man who's done 3 years at one of the most academic packed institutions in the country on our dime. So we've educated him. He was lined up to go NFO, which for people that don't know, it's like non-foreign liaison officers, right? That's NFOs.
No. I'm sorry. That's the, like a navigator, like not like the pilot, but the guy that flies backseat on an F-18.
Backseater. So you were lined up to be a freaking Top Gun backseater guy like Goose, right? Yeah. And then life's a little bit, and you cakes. And then they say, we need you to step up and serve. And you're like, Roger that, line it up. And you get in a little bit of trouble, which, I mean, technically, we all know everybody in the service got something in their background, and there's still plenty of leaders doing great things. And they just cascades into you going from nuclear machinist mate to just, you could be and nothing against the conventional machinist mates. I love them to death, but come on, bro. Like, what are we doing? And did anybody ever like try to talk to you and be like, hey man, what's your story? Or you just another dude in boot camp, or you're like number 75? And
so in boot camp, they already knew a little bit about my background, because day P1 of boot camp, they're like, all right, you've got ROTC background, you've got a 99 on your ASVAB, you're going to be the RPOC for the division. So I was RPOC the whole time, never got fired. I'm pretty proud of that. Most divisions, they go through a few of them before they find a good fit. I was RPOC the whole time. And they identified that I was, doing really well in boot camp, both academically and all the other metrics that they're kind of tracking. So like towards the end of boot camp, they do like some kind of awards recognition stuff for different recruits. So I out of my graduating group was awarded like the top performing recruit, and was given the opportunity for a meritorious advancement to E3. They were doing what they could under the circumstances, and I was just kind of rolling with the punches, and I'm like, I'm going to make the most of it no matter what I'm doing, and just kind of kept plugging along.
And good on you for that, man. I think part of that's also going to come from your background, the way your parents probably raised you, right? The mentality they probably had. And look, like I know, we've both done this for a long time. We both have since moved on past the Navy and live other lives. And the show will always go on, and there's nobody that's a single point of failure. And it's hard for us I know it was hard for me to recognize that. When I recognized that one day that, hey, I'm just a cog too, I was like, oh, because that hurt, right? Yeah. But I really loved you. So okay, so you go through basic training, kick butt at the RPOC level, you make rank out of there. Even though I would imagine you were an E3 already because your college credits, right?
There was a combination of things that I was E3 no matter what at that point. So,
but it was a thought that counts, right? It's like, hey, thank you guys, I appreciate the love. You go to MMA school there in Great Lakes, and then you go. So I was on USS Ogden. Ogden. So which Austin class LPD did you go to?
I went to the Dubuque. It was LPD 8.
And was Dubuque over in Sasebo at that time, or was it back in?
No, she had just come back from Sasebo, maybe less than a year prior to when I reported. She was based out of San Diego when I showed up.
Okay, so San Diego, LPD 8, Austin class steamship, which I love that platform, man. I love the LPD, the older LPD platform.
Yeah. It was a great platform. I mean, cruise size was somewhere around like 350 or something, and that's just small enough to where you can get to know almost everybody on the ship.
Really, you can. And you bring on the Marines and have some good times. How long were you on board that ship?
Just over 5 years ultimately, because my initial tour there was scheduled as a 5-year tour. That was kind of the standard for an MM coming out for first tour. So I got there in December of 2003, and I transferred to ATG in January of 2009. So just a shade over 5 years.
So when you got to San Diego, did you show up? You were a single sailor coming to San Diego?
Yep, 100%.
And were you living on the ship? Were you living out in town?
Yep. No, that was back in the good old days where if you were E4 and below and you had less than 4 years, your home was the ship.
The ship. Yeah.
So,
and you're a little bit taller than I am, right? No hate.
Yeah,
you are, right? So were you on a top rack, or were you on a middle rack, or they put you in a bottom rack?
No, I had a top rack, which suited me pretty well.
Yeah, good for you. So you get to the ship, you're there as a snipe, you're getting to work as an MM on the ship. And what is your first thought? Here I am living on the boat, ship's company. Did you like the job? Like you said, you got the opportunity to break it open, nuts to bolts, got the chance to see.
I mean, I like I said, I'm an engineering kind of guy, so I like the idea of taking stuff apart and putting it back together and making sure that it's working right, or if it's broken, figuring out why it's broken and getting it working right when you put it back together. So it was a really tough time as far as the workload went, and the crew morale at that point was a little bit kind of beaten down and kind of they've been rode hard and put away wet a little bit. So me coming in with kind of this like, all right, it's a chance to learn everything I can and just, turn and burn and turn some wrenches and stuff. It kind of stood out a little bit against the people that had been there for 2 or 3 years. And it afforded me the opportunity to get involved with a lot of different, rebuild projects that other people were just like, oh, I don't really want to do that, or I'm tired, or, so a combination of the right mental attitude and the right circumstances and a couple of people that kind of took me under their wing as a mentor early on kind of got me set on a really good path to learn a lot about my rate very quickly, which helped me on my advancement exams. The attitude and just being involved in a lot of different things helped on the eval. So I was what some people call a rate grabber, I guess. Like I advanced very quickly. I put on first class by the time I was at my 3.5 year mark in the Navy.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at that, you had done 3 years at college, theoretically in the Navy, right?
Yeah.
And then so you matured, right? For me, it's not even about being in the Navy; it's like maturing.
That's part of it too. I was 23 when I got to the ship. I wasn't some 18-year-old fresh out of high school with no life experience. I'd been to college. I'd screwed up and had the DWI. I kind of had Navy in my blood from my family and from ROTC program. So it wasn't some shocking, having to adapt my life to the Navy. I was like, okay, this is, I'm used to this, so it fit.
And to be a good engineer, right? I think, in my opinion, the best, and at least the best mechanics, they're not the ones that are too freaking high to the right. Like, I'm quitting everything right now and I'm not coming back ever again. They're a little more stoked. They're like, okay, hold on. We got to pull this thing apart. We got to figure this thing out. And they're the ones that want to sleep in the pit. Those are those mechanics that really get into it. And I think that when you find your tribe or you find the people that are into it, my first ship was Bellawood, Sasebo, and it was a LHA. And I stood watching the pit for all 3 of those years. And my first year, I hated it. But my next 2 years, I loved it because I got the chance to be built in those projects that really mattered, right? You got to be in the steam drum. You got to be in the mud drum. You got to be working on the blowers or the feed pumps. And it was cool because you felt like, hey, I got some responsibility in this thing. And then people start to recognize, hey, he's got potential, he's got talent. And then for you picking up rank, Again, you came in at an accelerated pay rate already because your college education, and then you're academically. There's a difference between, my opinion, there's smart people, but they have
Sure.
not educated themselves on how to incorporate the new information, right?
Sure.
That's what college taught me. College taught me I was already intelligent, but I learned I trained myself how to read things and incorporate the information so I could then give you back what I had to, right?
Right.
You knew how to do that already, right?
That's one of those things, it's one thing to know information. It's an entirely different thing to be able to communicate that information effectively. And whether that means communicating effective information to your leaders or, in the scope of Navy advancement, you need to be able to communicate that information effectively in a standardized test for the advancement exam. And that's a skill unto itself. Like, it's not about just knowing the material. It's understanding how to standardize tests work and knowing that there's going to be one wildly wrong answer, two answers that are going to be like kind of like, yeah, maybe it could be that, and then one answer that's just a little bit better than the other answers. It's never like you've got A, B, C, and D, and like B through D are completely wrong and A is the obviously right answer. So it's a skill to take a standardized test. And that helped me too.
I get it, man. That's how when I looked at how I advanced up the ranks, I was strategically studying, but using the bibs that they gave me, which gave me, okay, you gave me the majority of the content. And then I got like the North Star study guides, and I would use those. And then, of course, I don't got to be the best in the world. I just got to be better than a certain percentage of everybody else in my community. Right?
Sure.
Because so you get to first class, and how was it for you even as a second class? Were they throwing you directly into leadership positions in the pit?
I would say absolutely. I was a work center soup right before I made second class. Actually, as a second class, before I put on first, they went through a series of like LPOs that didn't really work out. So they appointed me as a second class, and this was like a month before I ended up making first class, so it worked out okay.
Yeah.
But they made me the LPO as a second class, and there were 3 first classes that they'd already kind of passed through. And then from a watch standing perspective, I got my EAL qualification as a second class.
Nice.
After I'd been on the ship for right around 2 years. It was maybe a month into our first deployment. So not only did I climb the ranks quickly, but I climbed the watch stations relatively quickly as well. And again, like a lot of that was timing and mentorship and a couple senior chiefs like identifying like, okay, he's got some intelligence and some talent and some plant understanding that we can groom into a good EAL. And part of it was timing with the ship cycle. Like during my entire 5 years there, we did 2 deployments. We did a dry dock and we did an in-serve. So like as far as putting yourself through the grinder of like the operational cycle of the ship, like it went from cradle to grave basically and back again.
That's the hope of a first tour sailor, 5 years, right?
Yeah.
A lot of my time is overseas in Japan, and first term sailors only do 3 years. But when I came into the Ogden, it was a stateside ship, and I'd have these sailors that had been on the boat for 4 or 5 years. They had so much corporate knowledge for that platform; it was freaking unreal. And I've never had that experience because in Japan, you just don't get that, right? You don't build that depth. And then for everyone that's listening, EAL is the engineering officer of the watch. That is a top enlisted. What's the top watch station for the engineering department? Officers enlisted does not matter. But the way he kind of just threw that out there is the average sailor doesn't get to EAL, the engineering officer of the watch qualification, until arguably, I would say the top runners, maybe E5, and maybe at the end of that 3-4 year mark. Definitely not at the beginning of like 2-year mark, but that's just my experience because the captain has got to want to buy off on that qualification as well, right? And so it does go to show, again, just the caliber of leaders you got the chance to serve with. because they recognized who you were out the gate. And one of my favorite things about being who the Navy grew me to be is I can smell talent a mile away, right? They trained me to recognize talent in people quickly, and then I can start to work with them to start to figure it out and figure out how to best plug them into the game so they can go do great things. And it sounds like you had some of those kinds of leaders on that ship.
Absolutely. And I can't stress that enough. Like granted, I brought what I brought to the table, but I couldn't have done that on my own without having these key leaders, the chief engineer and 2 senior chiefs being like, no, our next EO is going to be MM2 Thompson, not like, awesome. which on a Steam platform, like you were kind of alluding to, like, generally it's like maybe senior first classes. Usually it's chiefs and some junior officers that are standing EO. So to be able to pluck a second class petty officer and put them in charge of the entire engineering plant, answering directly to the chief engineer, the captain, and the officer of the deck, and potentially having a variety of first classes and maybe even chiefs on your watch team that are serving in positions, at least positionally subordinate to you, is a unique leadership challenge on its own. You got to delicately balance the fact that, okay, they outrank you, so you need to show them the proper level of respect. But at the same time, when you're on watch and you're standing engineering officer of the watch, effectively they don't outrank you. They need to answer to your orders and respect where you're coming from. So, and that was a big part of my qualification board with the captain was questions about how am I going to handle leadership challenges. Like they'd already given me like the worst murder board in the history of man, as far as all the technical aspects of the job and knowing, all the parameters of how the plant was supposed to run and what the limits are and different things and all that. But when it came to the board with the captain and the XO in his stateroom, it was more about, okay, well, when Chief so-and-so, who's the BTOW, gives you some back talk about what you're telling them to do, how are you going to handle that? That was the gist of the board with them at that point.
And that's good. Theoretically, by the time you get to the commanding officers board, it should just be we're wrapping this whole thing up, Sure. Otherwise, they shouldn't let you got that far. So when you look back on your first ship, and I appreciate the senior chiefs, the Chang, I appreciate the mentors that you had there. Did you already have an idea wrapping up that first ship? So did you know, hey, I'm staying in the Navy, I'm not going to just get out of that 4-year mark and call it?
No, at the beginning of the tour, I was like, okay, I'm going to do my 4 years and kind of see where things take me. I knew that doing the 4-year minimum was going to get me eligibility for the GI Bill to potentially get out and go back to school and finish a degree. Yeah. But somewhere along the way, life happened. I met my wife. We got engaged. I was advancing quickly, and we were looking at like, okay, now I get BAH as an E5.
Right.
And then, when we get married, the BAH goes up even more. And I ended up deciding to re-enlist to at least get a shore tour, where I thought, okay, maybe on a shore tour, I'll get a little bit more downtime and I can maybe kind of do dual duty of like my job in the Navy and maybe knock out some college classes on a shore tour. So I was around, I want to say right around my 3-year mark. So about the time I made first class, I made that decision to re-enlist.
Okay.
So, and that's what extended my tour on the Dubuque from being just, the end of my 4-year enlistment to being the full 5-year first tour obligation.
Time. And then you got the chance to go to, did you want to go to a float training group San Diego next, or?
I wanted to stay in San Diego, and there were pretty limited shore options as I was looking for orders. What I knew of ATG was from the training cycle and kind of that older mentality of ATG of like they were kind of the asshole inspectors, pardon the expression. Like,
group,
So I wasn't super excited about the idea of going to ATG, but I was happy to stay in San Diego because that's where my at the time my fiance and soon-to-be wife was living, and we didn't really want to have to move.
So what is your wife originally from Southern California, or did she?
No, she's originally from Oregon. She came down to San Diego to go to San Diego State.
Okay.
And when she finished her education there, which, sorry, I'm just drew a blank. Anyways, when she finished her education there, she got a job in the catering industry at one of the hotels in downtown San Diego.
Okay.
And she was kind of going to give it a go to see how San Diego worked out for at least a year. And then we met, and, again, life kind of happens, and
Yeah.
decisions kind of end up making themselves.
It's so many of us that join the service. I'm in Florida now because I met my wife in Florida. I'm not from Florida originally. I did a recruiting tour here, met my wife. When I retired, I came to Florida. You found Southern California, and it's a great place. It's always interesting to hear how people how they end up where they're going to be at. And then I think it's interesting that your wife came there with the adventure of education, and that she meets you. It's a big sailor town, so of course there's a great opportunity. You're going to meet a military person, right? And then start a life together, and then there you go. And then, like you said, you were young, but you guys were planning marriage, but you didn't want to leave San Diego quite yet because you weren't sure. I mean, life, right?
Right.
I remember when I told my wife Erica that we were leaving ATG and going to Japan. She was crying. What? But so anyway, I digress. You get orders to a float training group San Diego, and it's shore duty theoretically in San Diego.
Sure.
Are you going to the engineering shop? Are you going to N82?
That's where I went. Yeah.
Okay. So N82, just for everyone that understands, they're the guys that, like, when I was there, I was with the damage control teams. He's there with the engineering teams. They'll go on different ships and they'll do engineering inspections, assessments, really training, prep work, all kinds of evolutions and drills to give the commanding officer the best idea, the status of their engineering plant, right? And because that's how I looked at the job when I got there. Because like you, I had the float terrorism mindset. So when I learned what the book said it was supposed to be, I was like, what's a little different? It's all about how you communicate what we're doing here.
Absolutely.
And
I got to ATG at exactly the right time, as the commanding officer there at the time was really campaigning to change the image of ATG and really focus on, one, do everything by the book, be able to quote, line by line out of the applicable reference where you're coming from, whether it was a material deficiency or a training deficiency. Yeah. But on top of that, particularly in the STEAM team in N82, we really looked at, once you got past LOA and verifying that the equipment was working as designed, that the next step was training the crew to operate effectively and to increase their level of knowledge, not just for normal operations, but also in response to casualties. So we really looked at it as a partnership with the ship's force to, not only are you bringing the ship back to life, but you're bringing the crew back to life in a way, and kind of refreshing their knowledge, or maybe they're brand new in their watch station and they've got the bare minimum to get it done, but they could get better. So we always look at it as a partnership, and not as a conflict, but as a, let's work together to make the ship and the crew as good as you can possibly be. And that seemed to be a really effective approach across all the ships that we put through a training cycle.
Really, and it's that best approach in life in general, right? If you're gonna lead teams, especially teams that are on two different platforms, but they need to come together, the best way to look at it is as a partnership. And unfortunately, somebody could always go lead and serve or lead and follow if you got to go down that road, but it's a lot more fun for everyone to want to be friends and work together and with them, right? What's in it for me? Well, what's in it for you guys is you get to be qualified, certified, and get us out of here. And we get to come here every day and feel like we're happily doing a good service for our Navy and for you, right? And I felt exactly the same way. And then the other thing, I don't know about if you thought about this or not while you were there, but I got the chance to go on all the different ships that are of the same class that I'm going to go on next. And so
Yeah.
I know what the reality is, not
Yeah,
what some
absolutely.
chucklehead's going to tell me, right?
No, I mean it's a perfect opportunity to, get a peek behind the curtain to see where things really are. If you're able to stay on that same waterfront, kind of the ups and downs of each ship out there or each class of ship out there. And if you've done your job right, you've probably networked your way into, some decent connections at each ship that you've been to.
Yep.
So
That's how I got. I mean, that's how I got the George Washington. Right? They picked me right out of ATG and said, "Come on over." So, real quick before we move on to your next command, you went through Chiefs initiation on board ATG. That's
correct.
really where we got to know each other the best, was during your
Okay.
initiation season. When you went through Chiefs initiation, we called you Six. That was a nickname that we all had for you because
Yeah.
time in service, right? It wasn't
Right.
really about your age, but it was years of service. And a lot of us had never really been exposed to anybody that, I mean, I thought I picked up Chief fast in under 10, and then
Right.
you got there in 6, right? What was that process like for you? Like, did you have any major takeaways from your initiation that you were just like, man, that was my favorite part, or that was the best lesson I learned from that whole thing?
So I would say the best part of the initiation process for me was it was a great opportunity to get to know the mess at ATG and really connect with at least the very active members within the mess. And the talent pool that we had at ATG at that time was just super impressive. The number of people at ATG at that time that went on to become Master Chiefs or Warrant Officers or LDOs. It was just tremendous. We had just an immense talent pool, and it was a great opportunity for me as a young person within the Navy, at least time in service, to be able to draw upon such an amazing pool of mentors. And the process to me was pretty fun. A little bit more background. While I was at MIT, I was in a fraternity. So obviously a fraternity has its own initiation process. So I've,
Cool.
had some exposure to something, similar in some ways. I had a pretty good working relationship with my sponsor during the initiation process. And there was a lot of times that, we'd just be touching base. I'd be like, okay, I get that the point of this exercise is that sometimes you get stuck with things that there's not really a point to. You just got to get it done.
Yeah.
So I kind of figured out some of the pieces of initiation as I was going through it in a way that a lot of times I think Chiefs don't really fully understand initiation until the next year when they're on the other side and they're administering the initiation process. But I kind of had a pretty good handle on it as I was going through it, and just try to have fun and enjoy the camaraderie with. It was a great group of people that I was being initiated with. So it was a good experience.
Yeah, no doubt. Your guys, I was telling you before we jumped on the call, your guys' initiation season, and I did a lot of Chiefs initiations, but that year was a special year. And of course, it was ATG, right? Because
Right.
that was again, you could probably get a whole listing of the people that were a part of that command. And there's a lot of shakers and movers in the Western, on the Pacific Fleet side of the Navy for sure. I mean, hell, Eli Robles is there now as the freaking CMC for
Right.
ATG. Right? So
Yeah.
I keep on going. But anyway, so after ATG, you're a chief petty officer now. What are you thinking for your career? Are you looking like I want to go to an LHD, LHA? Are you?
So I made chief. That was September, right after I got to ATG. So I basically still had my 2.5 years left of my tour ahead of me. So I wanted to kind of make the most out of my tour at ATG, put myself in the best position to make senior chief as I could, coming from a short tour, which sometimes can be challenging, particularly in an engineering rate.
Right.
I ultimately I ended up deciding to apply for LDO towards the end of my time at ATG, right when it was my first eligibility for senior chief, and it was also my first real eligibility to apply for LDO. But I had enough exposure to the LDOs on the waterfront Bob Bailey, being a really big name on the waterfront, was kind of a mentor. And then we had a couple of LDOs in the N82 shop at ATG. So I put in for LDO because once I made chief, like I kind of made the mental commitment of like, all right, I'm in khaki now. Like I'm going to make the Navy a career.
Right.
So then it was just a matter of like, okay, where can my career take me? How can I best impact, engineering in the Navy? How can I best lead sailors in the Navy? How can I impact the most people? So LDO seemed like the right path.
Sure. Okay, so
And then
you got the LDO papers out of ATG?
Yep. The LDO results came out like right before the senior chief board was going to meet. So I'll never know if I would have made senior chief at 9. That's a minor regret because I think I had a good shot at it, but I picked up LDO my first time applying right out of ATG. So I ended up I had orders to the Baton on the East Coast that got canceled like a month before I was going to execute those orders, so I could just extend my time at ATG to my commission.
Okay. So that extended you at ATG, which is actually not bad because, like you said, you're getting to network, you're getting a little more seasoning, a little more time in the cooker, if you will, to deliver the best limited duty officer, engineering focused LDO to the fleet. So you commissioned and you go to knife and fork school up in, is that in Pensacola for you, or is that?
No, it's in Newport, and because of the timeline and what orders were available, I didn't go through the knife and fork school or what the normal, like the LDO commissioning school is. I got the option if I could do either that or I could go to the P Chang engineering pipeline, also out of Newport. So I was like, okay, do I need something that's going to tell me how to use the right manners in the wardroom? Or both my parents were naval officers. I think I'm going to be fine.
Yeah.
Let me get the engineering school that's going to prepare me for. I had orders to the Cape St. George, which is CG 71, so a gas turbine. So a different type of platform than what I'd been used to or exposed to. So they sent me to gas turbine Chang school instead, which I think was the right move.
Yeah. And so how long is that school going to be?
It was right around 4 months. It ended up being slightly longer than that because we kind of gapped over the Christmas holiday. School started up in early December and finished up in April.
And Cape St. George was in San Diego?
Also out of San Diego, yep.
So were you married by that point?
Yes.
So your wife stayed in San Diego while you theoretically deployed to Rhode Island for a 4 or 5 month school?
Yep.
Well, how'd you like Rhode Island?
It's all right. I mean, it was kind of like the worst possible time of year to be there, December to April.
That's crazy.
But I was familiar with the Massachusetts winters from my time at MIT, so it wasn't a big shock.
I went to Rhode Island for the Senior Enlisted Academy and for CMC school, and I was like, oh my God, this is the SWO Mecca. I got to go pray to the SWO gods because bro, I mean, I am a black shoe surface sailor, DC man. I was raised by chiefs, LDOs, warrant officers, and freaking SWOs, right? Those are who raised me. And so getting to go to Newport and to be around where they all grow up I always thought it was kind of cool.
It's a cool town, and definitely it's an interesting command to be at. All the different schools they've got going on up at Newport.
Yeah. And NAPS, seeing all the kids in the Naval Academy prep school marching around like they're in boot camp. So when you get to Cape St. George, you're going there to be the Chang?
No, I was going there to be the MPA.
Oh, okay. That's right. So you're gonna go be the MPA gas turbine. You got a top snipe. Was there a Divo as well? A first tour JO Divo?
There's a handful of them. You've got an Electro, you've got an MP division officer, and you've got an OXO or an A gang division officer.
Okay, so how was that going to a gas turbine ship as an MPA? I mean, had you rode gas turbines at ATG while you were there?
So once I knew I was headed to a gas turbine, I did a couple of kind of ride-alongs with the gas turbine team just to
Smart.
kind of get a familiarity with the plant layout and to learn what I could. Certainly, the engineering gas turbine pipeline up in Newport is a phenomenal school. Taught you a lot about the plant and operational parameters, and you had to memorize, drawings of different systems and stuff. So I would say just going through that engineering school at Newport was like a 75% solution to getting a new EAL letter upon reporting. Like it was a good primer for you to go through that and show up really kind of hitting the dead plates running.
As a DC man, I got the chance to ride all the platforms at ATG, right? I wasn't just on one particular thing, but I noticed significant differences between the different platforms and the crews.
Sure.
Right? You're gonna feel it, right? There's a difference between like an engineering department on like a Gator and an engineering department like on a destroyer or a cruiser. Because on a Gator, they're like the engineers are like the stuff, right? They're like, we keep the lights on. When you go to a destroyer or cruiser, it's kind of all about combat systems. It's kind of all about the Corvette stuff, right? So how was it being a part of the wardroom on a freaking cruiser with an 06 Major Commander as your CO?
I actually enjoyed it. So for the first like 6 to 9 months that I was there, they were coming out of a dry dock period.
Okay.
So it was once again I was being thrust onto a ship at probably the most challenging time in its life cycle, and trying to bring it back to life and get through LOA and get through the training cycle and get certified. And then, oh, by the way, they dropped an in-serve on us right at the end of that year too.
Sure, why not?
So it was. I spent the first 9 months of my time there just trying to, do my best to keep things moving for the engineering department through the different wickets that we had to hit. I didn't really spend a lot of the time in the wardroom, socializing, and certainly didn't spend any time at all working on any of my SWO pin qualifications for, like I said, the first 9 months. And then, once we got past in-serve and we started, gearing up for deployment, that's when I was able to shift gears a little bit to be a little bit more integrated in the wardroom and to start focusing on, getting my officer of the deck qualification and all the prereqs for that, and eventually my SWO pin.
Well, and I'm sure they understood,
Oh yeah.
I can tell you from my CMC perspective, I would 100% be like, the MPA needs to be right where he's at right now, taking care of the Chang, taking care of the plant, taking care of the pit, and on deployment when there's more reps and sets and a little more laid out there, you can go up there and get your stuff. And how was that qualifying to drive the ship on the bridge?
That was a lot of fun. It was a new challenge, and I would say there are a few moments in my career that are as satisfying as, being on the bridge at full power, doing, 30 knots on a cruiser and doing like div tacks and like formation stuff, and like just really, like, it was a lot of fun. And that's the way I approached it. And the captain appreciated that, I think. He appreciated that I kind of kept my nose to the grindstone for the first 9 months and was in the pit where I was needed. And then he appreciated that I kind of really attacked the SWO calls when the time was right.
I get, but similar to you, people like us, those are the things that just make sense, right? I'm gonna attack the next target. So right now I got to focus on this engineering inspections. Now I'm gonna go get this qualification. Okay, how do I get there? I got to lay all these checks out. I learn them all. I get it, and then I go forward. I love the watch, standing watching the pit. I love watching the pit too, the team and the symbiotic nature. But watching a watch team on the bridge is freaking, when they're doing it good, it can be freaking awesome.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
It can be huge. So how long are you on Cape St. George from ensign all the way till JG?
And almost up to the point of LT, actually. Like, I ended up being there basically like 3.5 years. So I was like about 6 months out from putting on LT. when
Okay.
I left Cape St. George.
And so as an LDO, you do that sea tour. Are you
Mhm.
going to go now back to shore duty? Because that's a pretty
No.
long time. No,
Nope,
what's that?
it's back-to-back sea. As a newly commissioned LDO, what you can expect is a 3-year sea tour followed by a 2-year sea tour.
Okay.
And there's some special exceptions to that, but that's kind of the standard thing. So when I was up for orders, I kind of wanted to stay in San Diego still, and I got the opportunity. At least on paper, I was going to go be like the fire marshal on USS America LHA 6.
Okay.
So they sent me through the DCA school that's out of San Diego.
Yep.
When I got there, they already had enough warrant experience with repair division experience, so they didn't really want to make me a fire marshal. What they were really lacking was some Mustang leadership for auxiliaries division, because they had a SWO doing the job and he was getting ready to transfer, and they hadn't really identified who was going to replace him, and they felt like A Gang was struggling a little bit under just a traditional SWO leadership rather than having some Mustang in there. So they decided that I was going to take over as OXO.
Okay. Well, that's a good look for you though too, because you had never really gotten that opportunity yet, and as you're developing the package for your future as a chief engineer, that's auxiliaries can kill you if you're as a Chang, because you don't see it coming. You're busy focusing on main 1, main 2, and all of a sudden A Gang will just botch whatever big ship evolution was going on. And you just be like, what? We didn't lower the freaking stern gate. What? It's broke? What?
Well, and America is kind of unique from an A Gang perspective in a couple ways. One, it's an LHA that doesn't have a well deck and doesn't have a stern gate. And then two, it's got the hybrid propulsion plant where sometimes it runs on a gas turbine engine, and then sometimes it runs off of a high voltage electric motor. And there's 6 ship service diesel engines that generally you're running 3 or 4 of them at a time to generate the high voltage electrical power to power the motors. So it's kind of a weird hybrid mentality between, okay, you've got a diesel engine that's part of A Gang, but it's really supplying power to main propulsion. So it kind of brings A Gang more into the forefront of being like a critical aspect of engineering. So it's not like that, oh, we forgot to do this, or it's this little minor thing, or it's not really like you're not really thinking about things outside of the pit. Like you're inside the pit as part of A Gang on the America.
So the enginemen in A Gang are at times providing major power to the electrical distribution system. And are you staffed with enough enginemen to keep those engines running?
No, not even close.
Oh no! Why I feel like that was the way to go.
No, they did some sort of crazy optimum manning, and typically you've got like 4 or 5 enginemen. Okay. And like I said, you're running 4 out of 6 diesel generators around the clock. Like
around the clock.
Just doing the routine PMS, like the standard maintenance for your engine hours. They're run ragged, and God forbid you have some sort of engine casualty where you're having to like tear it apart and take a look at a cylinder head or whatever. Then it's just brutal. Like those guys were worked to death. And,
I can only imagine.
I had a huge amount of respect for the amount of just blood, sweat, and tears that they really put into the plant.
I bet, man. I was CMC on Ashland. It was a diesel platform. And up till that point, I only knew enginemen to be like EDGs, emergency diesel generators. The spaces always looked immaculate because they almost never run. And when I got to that ship, the LSD, I was like, oh my God, you guys are down there freaking wrenching. Like it was freaking hardcore. Like, I had never thought enginemen got down like that. They were as close to BTs and MMs as, that's because the gas turbines were a little bit different too, right? I feel like their main space was like air conditioned a little bit, right? It's just, again, it's different from my perspective. And so now hearing what you're telling me, how did the GSs and the ENs get along? Who made the decision on what was going to be provided the electrical and what was not? Who called that ball?
It generally was based on ship speed requirements. So
Okay.
the motor could handle up to about 8 to 10 knots, basically,
Okay.
and then anything over that, you had to switch over to the gas turbine engine.
Okay.
But you know how the Gator Navy is. Normally, you haul ass to get to where you're going, and then you're kind of like loitering around, just trolling around a little bit. So
Yeah.
I would say a good 70 to 80% of the time, you're just doing the diesel generator thing and running around on the high voltage motor at low speed. So really, that decision effectively comes from the officer at the deck driving the ship, and what they need for maneuverability.
Man, just some of the, I think that's just another nuance for the engineering team to think about, right? As they're managing their people, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Captain, if you keep operating at this level, our resiliency is going to dip because the manning for them. Now, for your engineering department on that ship, were they cross training people to possibly learn how to help stand watch in engine and spaces?
Absolutely. From a watch standing perspective, there was a lot of cross training, and there was a lot of a lot of different rates that were standing watch,
Good.
monitoring the operating engines.
Good.
But again, when it comes to the maintenance aspect, whether it's corrective maintenance for a casualty or just the standard routine PMS stuff, like that was all just the engine shop.
Yeah.
So
That, I think to that point, right, the best way to attack the engineering on any ship is to put all of it into the same gumbo and cook it up, because there's never enough of one rate to do all of what that rate's supposed to do. So
absolutely.
you got to get creative, man. You got to cross train everything. And how I got okay with that, because as a DC senior chief master chief, at first I was like pushing back hard, but then how I got okay with that was okay. But whenever the bells ring, the whole damn department needs to come and run it, right?
Yeah.
And if we could say that's going to be okay, then I'm down for us learning everything else, because at my heart, I'm an engineer, right? My heart,
Sure.
I'm a snipe. I want to be in the pit and working on the things, but if the bell rings, I got to go, and that's a priority too. So
Sure.
how long are you on America for? Do you do a full 2-year tour on America?
Let's see. So I got there, I want to say sometime around, maybe it was June after the school started. So June of 16 is when I got there, and then I left in November of 18. So I ended up doing a little over 2 years.
Okay. And now you've got the A gang stink on you. You probably you've now got a couple of platforms down as an LDO. You're a lieutenant, I would imagine, at this point. What are the options for you at shore duty? Is it back to ATG? I mean, really?
So a lot of the shore tour options at that point are in-serve or in-serve related. Like some of the in-serve groom teams, or actual in-serve out of Norfolk. I got a really unique opportunity though, on the list of things that was available to me, and I had to get like a recommendation letter from the CO and a few other things. But there was a spot on an admiral's staff out of Hawaii on the mid-pack staff, which is kind of an extension of Comnav Surf Pack. It's kind of like a little detachment out there, and it also included a spot promote to 04.
Nice.
So, after only wearing LT for 2 years, it gave me an opportunity to temporarily put on and get paid as an 04 on an admiral staff.
Very cool.
And then you, as part of that job, you end up being kind of an executive agent for Surf Pack in certain roles. So there was a lot of bleed through on basically helping the ships prep for ATG events. So having that ATG experience in my background already, and then also having done, numerous training cycles on 3 different platforms, and, going through, 4 different LOAs and in-serves, and I really felt like I had the right tools in my belt to go attack that role in a way that was going to be helpful to the ships on the waterfront in Hawaii.
Very cool. And your wife was open to going to Hawaii?
Given that we didn't have much choice and it seemed better than Virginia at the time, yeah,
Okay.
and the
Well,
pay
that's
raise,
pretty.
as a little carrot dangling didn't hurt.
Yeah. So, and your primary focus is then going to be the small boys that are home ported out of Hawaii.
Yep. So
Cool.
you end up being the ISIC for the Port Royal, direct ISIC for them. And then there's also a Desron based out of Hawaii, Desron 31, and you're the ISIC for Desron 31. So the ships that they're kind of overseeing, you're also overseeing. And then you also help kind of liaison between the shipyards and I'm drawing a blank what they call the maintenance facilities out in Hawaii because it's
Pearl
HRMC.
Harbor or something.
It's
Yeah.
HRMC.
Okay.
You kind of end up being a late liaison between those groups and the ships, and then in some roles there's some administrative responsibilities for all the ships across the waterfront in Hawaii. So it's a really complicated command structure, but basically end up being oversight for 11 ships.
Well, and you're down the street from Pac Fleet and
Right.
Indo-PACOM.
Mhm.
Right? So if your boss is an admiral, of course he's probably circling in all those areas as well,
Yeah.
getting that stink on him. Okay, and so is that a 2-year billet?
That was actually set up to be. I'm trying to think if that was supposed to be a 2 or a 3-year tour. I think it was supposed to be a 3-year tour because
You're overseas, yeah.
Yeah, the overseas aspect and the spot promote part of it.
Okay, and so did you get to finish that entire tour there in Hawaii?
So not exactly. So here's where my career kind of took a little bit of a sidewinder. I ran into some mental health issues,
Okay.
and I had to go on LIMDU for a little bit.
Okay.
So they actually transferred me over to ATG MidPac out of Hawaii, and I was basically like the DCA for MidPac, ATG for about a year, and then through the med board process, I was medically retired just shy of my 18-year mark.
Okay. Well, I mean, not everybody needs to know all your things, but I know you went through a whole bunch of stuff throughout your journey, man, and I think that's an interesting detour for sure. But you got the chance to get retired, you said.
Yep,
right?
retired as an LT with full retirement benefits, 100% permanent total from the VA, 70% rating from the Navy.
The biggest thing is I'm just glad you talked to somebody, man. That's probably what matters more than anything.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, and me included, I'm also 100% total mental health. That's on my list, right? And I got to I was jacked, and I was probably a good 6 years past where I should have been talking to somebody, right? And I just kept going and going and going and going, and it's not healthy, Now so I'm glad to hear you. That takes a lot of freaking courage, bro. Just say whatever it was you had to say to talk to somebody and for them to help you was that's awesome.
I'm fortunate that I had some leadership that was understanding and supportive. I'm fortunate that it was at a time in the Navy where the perspective on that was becoming a little bit more understanding and supportive and less stigma. I'm not saying there's no stigma, but it's gotten better than it was, say, 10 years ago for sure. So it afforded me the opportunity to kind of seek out some assistance, and then gave them the opportunity to kind of evaluate the situation and the different dynamics and realize that it was time to off ramp me from the Navy to protect my mental health. And like I said, I'm fortunate that the process allowed me to retain retirement benefits and still be able to continue into a new and second career post Navy.
Yeah. So how was that when you first got out of the Navy? Were you just like, oh my God, it's like the Navy's over now? Like, was that a trip at first?
Well, the speed with which it happens when you go through a med board, like if you're approaching 20 years and you're thinking about retirement, you've got kind of time to lay it all out and plan it all out. And this was also like right at peak COVID stuff. So like it was kind of a weird transition, just kind of getting out of the Navy relatively quickly and not doing a retirement ceremony and then moving back to the States. The one thing that I was very fortunate in is that I've got my wife's cousin's husband, or, you know, for short, we'll just say he's a family friend or, you know, kind of family, runs an investment firm that he's had for over 20 years now. And towards the end of my career, he started talking to me about like, hey, you know, I want to keep this thing going. I'm probably going to eventually retire in my mid 60s, but you know, we've got a lot of clients that we want to continue to take care of. Would you be interested to come and learn the finance industry and the investment process and become a part of my firm and maybe get a chance at some ownership in the future?
Yeah. And that's how you got into what you're doing right now, which is working
Yeah.
in the finance. And did you say her family, he is in San Diego local?
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So she did have family that was in San Diego when she
Yeah,
came
her cousin
there.
was in San Diego when she came down to go to San Diego State. So she had at least a little bit of a foothold. She visited down in San Diego a few times in her teenage years, and that's kind of what gave her the idea of like, oh, I think I want to, you know, go to school at San Diego State and experience San Diego. So, but yeah, like having that little toehold here and being able to like transition smoothly out of the Navy and into a second career without having to do a lot of job hunting or rewriting my resume 100 times and sending it out and having to do interviews. And like, I know that process is extremely challenging, especially, you know, talking to some of my, my shipmates that are going through that process right now. It seems like, there are jobs out there, but connecting with the right job at the right time it can be tough. So I got lucky that I didn't have to fight that battle.
It can be, you know, I think that, you know, for me, I went to the high school ROTC instructor route and I loved it because I got a chance to keep a lot of my identity, even as I was coming to grips with like, hey, I'm not going to be on this ship anymore doing this thing that I'm super good at. Right. That's one of the things that I don't know if you've ever had to think about that, but when I talked to my wife one time, I was like, you know, it's hard to explain that I was really, really good at doing something and I'm never going to do that thing again. And that's
Right.
weird to think about. And it's not like I'm unhappy that I get to move on, but it's like I like to be. I loved being like an engineer and being good at it,
Sure.
and like being able to go do the critical thinking skills. And I think we all have this part of our life because the Navy ends at some point for everybody, and you got
Right.
to go do something else, right?
So for me, like in particular, like I said, because the Navy ended, you know, kind of cut my career short in a way, in an unexpected way. Like I definitely like have some of that lingering, like, man, I never got to be the chief engineer on the ship. Like, and when I started out as an LDO, that's kind of your long range goal is
Oh,
I wanted to go be a Chang on a ship and have a successful tour. And, you know, whether that's a great deployment or kicking ass on InServ or some combination of all the above, like I never got to be a Chang. So that's always going to be one of those like lingering, like
yeah,
not necessarily a regret, but like it's like one of those like what ifs, you know, like that
yeah.
would have been a sense of accomplishment that, you know, I could have carried with me, you
I
know.
get it, brother. Trust me. There was a few other CMC jobs that I was looking at. And matter of fact, you know, I wanted to be a carrier CMC someday. That was like one of
Oh
my
wow.
big ones, right? And I mean, that was what I was tracking for. And then life, people take advantage of you, whatever, right? But I remember my wife asked me one day, she said, how about you don't become a carrier CMC? Because she was looking at how much I was struggling
Sure.
just keeping because look, just like you, I went hard for a lot of years straight. Like no breathing for air, no stopping, cutting every shore duty early,
Yep.
college, everything. You don't get to Master Chief in 16 years on accident, especially in
Right.
a rate that's freaking competitive, right? And
Right.
so I remember when she said, maybe what if you don't do that? And I was like, whoa, 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 what do you mean? Like I thought that was like we were doing this together. And then when she brought that up, I was like, well, now I got to rethink life because it's like I thought that was part of the deal. And then once all of a sudden that goal was no longer as important, it was like, oh, by the way, I'm shaking all the time.
Right.
But I never wanted to admit it, or I never wanted to think about those things because I had to get to this goal that I was working towards, right? And that was
Right.
that programming. So man, I could appreciate having those because I'll have them too. But you just gotta move on with your life and figure out other
Definitely.
things. Yeah. So how you liking the finance industry? Is it fun?
I enjoy it. I mean, like we've talked a lot about my engineering background, but like part of engineering is kind of breaking things down and analyzing them to a certain extent. So
Huh?
that's kind of what you end up doing in the finance industry of like, whether it's you're looking at the stock market as a whole and trying to figure out what's going on with it, or if you pick, an individual company and the stock that you're looking at and looking at their financial records and what it is that they produce and how is that market share and is it growing and all the dynamics and the moving pieces.
Okay.
It's kind of an
Well,
interesting puzzle to try to solve.
it is, man. So finance is one of my favorite personal hobbies, right? I
Sure.
didn't have a lot of money growing up either, so I want to make sure I keep as much of the stuff that I got, but I want it to multiply and be plentiful, right? So, hey,
Right.
brother, we're gonna get ready to wrap this up and land this plane, but I'm gonna ask you some questions, okay?
Sure.
Um, okay. First of all, looking back on your career or just in your life in general, what do you think is one of the most valuable leadership lessons you've ever been, I would say, either recognized on your own or that someone's taught to you that you took with you?
Um, so later in my career, I kind of condensed in my own mind, how to define what is good leadership, and this is probably broadly applicable to the world in general, but certainly it's applicable within the world of the Navy. Um, and in my mind, it was all about making sure that you gave your people the right tools, the right time, and the right training to do their job right. And if you shortchange them on any of those things, then it's unfair to expect them to finish the job the right way. They're going to find a way to cut a corner to get it done, but it might not be the right way. So, I called it the three T's of Thompson leadership, but the tools, the time, and the training to do the job right.
Tools and time and training, the three T's. I like it. And I agree. I think it's actually unfair to hold anybody accountable for something they have not either been given the training. Everything you just said, right?
Yeah,
I would fight for that. On the reverse side, I think it's unfair for people not to apply themselves and freaking learn when training's being offered, right?
absolutely. There, you gotta rise to the challenge, so to speak. But you know,
Yep. No, I'm tracking. All right. So, what do you see are some of the biggest leadership challenges in organizations? I would just say throughout your experience, like, do you have top two or three that you see as being these are the same challenges you saw when you were at a Flow Training Group San Diego? You saw them when you were out there in Hawaii. You saw them consistently, and they're the top two or three challenges.
I think the biggest challenge for any leader in an organization or just an organization in general is the idea of buy-in. And whether you label the idea as the vision or the mission or the goal or whatever you want to call it, getting everybody from a diverse background and diverse experiences in their lives and their upbringing and what they've been exposed to, but getting them to buy into your idea of where the organization needs to go is the toughest challenge. And it's about, to a certain extent, it's about salesmanship.
Yep.
It's being able to condense your idea into a manageable piece. Like there's a great guy that you can find him on YouTube. He's got a few books. It's Simon Sinek, but
Mhm.
he talks about finding your why. Why you want to get something done and getting people to buy into that idea of why something is important and why it's not just important to you, And it's not important just to the organization, but to them as part of the organization. And that if you can get that buy-in, the momentum that you can build is tremendous.
Huge. And you said also something very powerful earlier in the conversation when you were talking about having the ability to communicate whatever it is you're trying to work, right? Because when I hear everything you just said, I'm just thinking about the ability to communicate. If you could communicate to people what they can gain by doing this thing, as well as satisfying what they're getting paid for or why they took the opportunity, they're gonna probably go do it,
Yeah.
right? And once you can figure out how to get them to line up their personal goals with the organization's goals, they're gonna unlock innovation that they didn't even see coming, and it's gonna be great. And it's
Absolutely.
personally, it's one of my favorite things about leadership and working with people, because I thank God for the leaders that shaped me in my journey. And how I pay it forward is I try to work with other people, right? And help them out in their life. I see also now, you're a dad, so you're raising kids, right? I've got a couple kids of my own here. How do you apply leadership skills to parenting?
I mean, my kids are just getting up to the age of where, the idea of maybe giving them some chores and some responsibility is kind of on the horizon.
Okay.
So that, there's always the obvious, like, lead by example, or, you can't tell them to do one thing when you're doing something else, or like, it's okay for me to have dessert, but you can't have any, or anything like that. So like making sure your actions align with what you're telling them, I think, is really important. And then age appropriate, building a sense of responsibility so that as adults, they're not going to be overwhelmed by responsibility out of the blue, and making sure that it's a gradual process that they grow into that.
Yeah. So watch out for the say-do mismatches, which are, I will tell you, as an adult, if you tell me one thing and then you do something else and you confuse me, I'm going to have a problem, right? The math is not going to math. And and Sailor math says the minute you break that one rule, I can apply that rule to anything else. Right. And hell hath no fury, as a sailor scorned, right? Because I'm going to start making and that was what I told people about 3M. Like, look, either we do 3M all the way right, or none of it matters, because we're not going to keep playing this game of who gets to pick who gun decks what today, right? That's just not going to work. And I asked you the question because a lot of parents, as I see this, I work with these teenagers. I've got a 17-year-old now, and I've got a 11-year-old, and I feel like a lot of parents, they kind of lose sight of the fact that leadership skills will help them as they raise their human beings, right? Sure. Because there really are people that get out there to the world, like in a school, and they've never really been given even the mentorship, right, of what you can get, you would think you would get from parents. And I think the other thing you said was giving them foundational building blocks that at the age appropriate level, right? So I'm not going to try to teach you a complex topic that you're not ready for yet. I've got to build you up to that point, and I think that's smart. All right, now let's get into some of the funner ones. Those are I'm trying to keep the leadership topic here, so people that watch this, right, will get that. All right, here we go. You're on the ship. It's Saturday night. Are you looking forward to the pizza or the wings?
I would say the wings, as long as they kept the fryers.
You don't want those new oven baked wings?
Those aren't happening. You gotta have that crispiness from the fryers.
I hear you, man. Okay, so next question. Would you rather have the birthing cleaners or be on the working party?
Working party.
Okay, got it. I have not yet had one person said they want the birthing cleaner. That's funny.
No, got to do the working party. At least you're outside and fresh air and, salt breeze.
I get it. De Niro or Pacino when it comes to movies?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm going to go De Niro.
De Niro? Oh, you might be my first De Niro. Okay. I like De Niro. I'm thinking like, what was it? Goodfellas. I'm thinking like,
I'm thinking Goodfellas. I'm thinking Casino, and I'm thinking Godfather 2.
Okay. How I came up with that question, honestly, brothers, like I kept thinking about like on a mid watch, what was something we'd be talking about
Sure,
on a deploy. Now that's definitely going to be a conversation topic, right?
100%. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. In your career, what was your favorite duty station?
I definitely look back at ATG as probably one of my best duty stations. Just the mentorship that I was able to get within the ATG mess, the exposure to all the different chiefs messes across the waterfront, and that being a really foundational part of my career progression. That was probably my best tour.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And you know what? For me too, it changed my life. It was, yeah, great. Great mess. What was your favorite Liberty port you ever went to?
I think Singapore. I've been to Singapore a bunch of times on deployments, kind of going back and forth on Westpacs. I just think it's a really neat city. There's a lot of interesting things to do. There's good sightseeing stuff in the daytime. There's great, food and drink for the nightlife.
Okay.
It's safe. It's clean. Most of the people speak English, but it's a melting pot for all the Southeast Asian cultures. So like, I think it's a
Yeah,
really cool city.
it really is. I love Singapore as well. You ever watch that Crazy Rich Asians movie?
Yeah,
And that was definitely a good one to watch just to get a good memory of what it was like to be in Singapore
sure.
and to feel that energy. All right, what was your hardest watch qualification when you look back on your career?
My first EAL letter, the EAL letter on the steam plant. I did basically 3 days straight of murder boards with two senior chiefs, a master chief, and a Chang he'd been in for over 20 years at that point. He was a prior MMC, LDO type. And when I say 3 days straight, I mean like 22 out of the 24 hours a day, I was sitting in the Chang's office getting just grilled on every possible aspect of the plant. And that was super challenging, but it definitely was formative and prepared me well for my career ahead of that.
Very cool, man. It sounds like a great experience. I'm not gonna lie. It sounds like a fun one. Okay, okay. I think I already know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask anyway. Well, you have Hawaii, so if you had the chance to ever do it again, and you got to pick your first home port, would you want to stay in San Diego, or would you want to try to go overseas again?
For my first home port, I think San Diego was the perfect fit. If I had to do it all over again and I had to do an overseas tour, the one that I didn't get a chance to do, but I've heard so many great things from the people that have been over there, would have been a tour in Japan.
Yeah.
I think that's a great opportunity that I missed out on, but
I hear you, man. I never got the chance to go to freaking Europe. God,
right.
it's all. Hey, you can't do it all. We can't be greedy. All right, favorite movie series. I used to say trilogy, but now it's just like series because there's so many different flavors out there. But do you have a favorite movie series?
So not necessarily my personal favorite, but it's a favorite from a family experience. My son recently has gotten into the Harry Potter series. So like kind of over Christmas break, we watched all the Harry Potter movies like in a binge over several days,
Oh,
and he
that's
was
awesome.
really into it, and just being able to share that experience with him made it pretty awesome.
That's freaking. The first Harry Potter movie I saw it when I was a Navy recruiter, and I had no idea what I was walking in to go see. Me and a couple of friends literally said, "Well, there's this movie called Harry Potter and whatever. Let's go watch it." And I came walking out of that movie like, I got to get that book. Like
Yeah,
that was a good movie.
yeah.
So good. Neither one of my sons like the dang movies, man. They kill me. I try to get them to watch it, and they're not into them. So whatever. Okay. Would you rather be independent or on a team?
Um, I think that's a little situational. I like the camaraderie of being on a team, but sometimes it's easier to get things done when you don't have anybody slowing you down or holding you back or with different ideas. You get to just plow through it as an individual. So I'll take the non-answer on that one. It's kind of a 50-50.
If it was a drink champs, you have to take a shot.
Right.
Okay. I think I already got this from you, but it was probably your 3 T's. But your personal leadership philosophy, is it your 3 T's?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Just really working hard as a leader to ensure that you give your team the right opportunity to do the right thing and to do it well. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So in the Chiefs mess, we've got deck play leadership. We got institutional technical expertise, professionalism, character, loyalty, active communication, sense of heritage. I mean, that's trauma when you think about that, right? You're doing push-ups, up, down, dip class. What's
Right.
dip class? Out of that acronym, which one is your favorite?
I think it's kind of a close tie between the technical expertise and the institutional, and it's really important to be a very good technical leader and be a master of your rate, so that you can lead your people well. But I also think it's really integral to understand how you fit into the Navy as a whole. And understanding, the background of traditions and, ceremonial things and everything that make the Navy a great institution.
Man, I love that answer because, I mean, until I became a chief, I really never put it all together because as an engineer, again, there's 2 kinds of people on ships, right? Engineers and writers.
Sure.
And it was all about us in the plant. It was all about us in our conversations and our everything we thought about was just selfish. And then when I became a chief and I got part of this mess and I had to learn how all the different things affected each other. And then when I became ultimately a CMC, I'm like, you got to care what supply needs, bro. You got to care what combat needs, bro. And it was, I kept telling people quit leading by division. Let's stop leading by division because we are a united team that has to support the commanding officer and
Right.
everything. And I think, yeah, for sure. I'm with you. Institutional technical expertise, spot on. Last question. Would you rather lead or follow?
Lead. No question. One of the big motivators for me to advance so quickly was to limit the number of people that could tell me what to do. I wanted to get that to be a very short list, like the Chang and the captain, and that's it.
I feel that, man. All right, bro, that's it. Do you have any save rounds or alibis?
No, it's been good, brother. Thanks for catching up.
Man, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for joining us on the Words from the Wise. Thank you for just being honest. And brother, thank you so much for being you. And I appreciate you, Six, man.
Yeah.
All right, y'all take care out there. I'm going to wrap this thing up and we're going to go ahead and call it a night. So we are out. Bye, everybody.
And I know I was born for this. I know I was born for this. Don't care for the critics, my words are like physics, a force that they can't stop. They just don't get it, I think they forget I'm not done till I'm on top. I know